Hello, I'm Somi Arian. I'm a tech philosopher and the founder of Impeak. My guest on today's podcast is Chris Mason, a professor of genomics, physiology, and biophysics at Cornell University. Many of you know that I'm super interested in all things science, genetics, and physics, and the cross-section of these fields with AI and blockchain. Although these days most people know me for my work in Web3, I remain super passionate about the wider world of science and technology, and I would love to be able to be at the forefront of helping bring these fields into Web3. So without further ado, let's get right into the conversation with Professor Chris Mason. Chris, thank you so much for being here. I haven't had a chance to read the book yet. I've got it, it's on my to-read list. But I listened to a few of your interviews, and especially I really enjoyed the interview you had with Lex Friedman, and I'm stealing a lot of his his guests, basically. So as I was explaining to you before we started, essentially nowadays a lot of my work is on the metaverse and Web3. And this new kind of generation of or iteration of the internet that's being created. I used to also do quite a lot of research on AI. I have a deep interest in all things to do with space, and genomics, and all the different interesting areas that you work on, and essentially trying to understand the human evolution. I believe that in this century we are morphing into something new. We are essentially becoming something else other than Homo sapiens because of the way that we are using technology. Although I also always have this inkling that maybe we are not using technology, maybe technology is using us. But that's that's another angle that we can look at. So you have done some really interesting work on all these different areas that I just mentioned. I think first things first, I wanted to get a better idea of how much maybe you may have looked at Web3 and whether you have had any, where you are in terms of your understanding of and your involvement in this new kind of area that we call Web3.
Yeah, well, I've looked a fair amount at some of the technologies that are behind it. Also, obviously, there's a lot of bandwidth, structural infrastructure changes that enable Web3 or some of the more later developments of sharing data that lets you actually do AR, VR tools, or even have different interfaces for accessing data and just communicating information on the internet. So I think it's broadly exciting. It's always better when you have more options, improved technologies, better tools, more ways to interface with people and with data. So I think it's writ large good. I think there's still a lot of people who critique it and say, well, is there something as Web3 that's doing that you can't at all do today? And so I think a lot of them are better versions of sort of mundane ways we interface with people today. But still, I mean, improvements are good. So I think people that are critiquing it just are saying, is it absolutely needed? But you could even argue we didn't absolutely need to go from boring HTML links and HTML coding to Java or PHP or other codes. Like those are also variations on what was original web scripting, but every bit is improved. So I think it's good to see continued improvement and iteration. And this will, there's been discussions even about sharing genomics data this way. Like it could have changed the way we share medical information, genetics data, the way we just share fitness data. Even has been discussed. Like so, it could potentially impact almost everything. The way the web already has, but just would be with a lot more options, a lot more interfaces. So, I think it's a writ large good.
Yeah. So the kind of at the core of it, what Web3 is about is essentially decentralization. It's kind of like trying to take the power from centralized entities, big corporations like Google, Facebook, etc., and give at least a degree of control back to people, and the individuals who have got, who are the source of this data, and to enable them to, maybe if they want to monetize it, or, have control of it, right, in any way that that they see fit. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's complete decentralization, because we are discovering that complete decentralization at the moment. At least we don't yet have the cultural and the social and the technological means to do that yet, because you still need some level of direction, leadership, etc. And the second thing, aspect of it, is tokenization, which we are going to talk about when talking about how to fund research and how to fund potentially, things like space explorations and things like that. So we will come to that. So from the viewpoint of, all the different things that you have worked on, from the viewpoint of, you're doing all this research and work on what it would be like to live outside of our Earth. I'm more and more inclined to think of whether the solution is necessarily to think about leaving Earth physically, or is it about trying to discover a different aspect of being that goes beyond the chemical, beings that we are, right? Like the digital side of us. So if I had a big pot of money right now, would I spend it? Like, I can see when I look at all the different billionaires like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, putting so much effort into space explorations. I feel like there's another aspect that we could explore, and that would be like our digital side. So so have you thought of that, about that at all, or do you think that leaving this or moving our meat suit to another place is necessarily like the solution?
Good question. So yeah, there is, of course, limitations to the meat suit, and I've written a lot in my book about ways to get upgrades or to do modifications to improve where we can live, how we can live, biochemical functions in our own cells that take lessons from other creatures, or even have genes within our own DNA that are just silent and not yet been active since we were, millions of years ago, a different variation of humans, but still rest inside of our DNA, like the gene to make your own vitamin C, for example, is still inside of us. So I think, and that's what we're working on in lab, is ways to reactivate those genes, control those genes, actually merge genetic, basically skills, genetic tools from other species into human cells. And so that's one approach which I've written about and talk a lot about. But to your point, the idea of a digital twin, or having, sending robots to other planets, which we already do, are of course in a lot of ways safer for the meat suit, because it doesn't get irradiated and damaged. But it is never, I think, as good in the near term as having someone with real-time adaptive skills and ability to improvise, because there's actually a time delay between Earth and Mars, anywhere from several minutes to a few dozen minutes of just processing. So it does take a while just even to have communication between planets. So you do need local autonomy, but you could have a version of a program, essentially, digital twin. And there's actually Daniel Kraft, that does a lot of work on this on digital health, the idea of twinning, and the X Prizes has a whole work on just digital twins. This idea of, can we make, for medical purposes, could we have a complete model of a person? So when you try and prescribe a medication, or you try to understand a response to a disease, that you can have a digital twin that is your best model for what might happen. So this is an active area of research in medicine, in robotics, and just in general, potentially consciousness. Could you, put your whole consciousness online? That's what's often called the singularity at some point, that we'll all be living online, and what Ray Kurzweil's talked about, which I think is supposed to be in the mid 2030s. But I hope that sounds wonderful. I hope that happens. I think it might be more complicated than what people have imagined, or that you might have a version of the digital twin that may not be quite as spot on as you'd like for yourself. It might be just a little bit different. I think it's hard to program peculiarity of people, but not impossible. But you'd want to almost build in free will algorithms, which is hard to program right now. But I think it's a good question, because we know that we're not suited for other planets currently. So we have to either modify ourselves, or send twins, or send robots, or all the above, which is, I think, the perspective I'm taking, is that we'll probably need all of these options, because we don't know which ones will be the most permanent, the most adaptable, and the most successful.
Yeah, definitely. So the singularity, I believe he says it's in the 2040s, 2045, but he thinks that by the end of this decade, yeah, by 2029, we will see AGI. I think that's the what he used to say. He's got a new book coming out that's called The Singularity is Nearer. The first one was near, so this one is The Singularity is Nearer, and that's coming out in 2023. So I'm really looking forward to that one to see what he's got to say. But Ray Kurzweil, he wanted to live forever, and he is been really deep into a lot of supplementation and things like that. And I actually have been taking a lot of the supplements that he's been talking about, because I was like, yeah, I want to live to the singularity, and I want to like be up there with Ray. But with all of that, he's still aging. Definitely, I can see that he's still aging. So we haven't solved that one.
We have not. No, I know his physician actually. Yes, he's still aging, and met him once, and so as we all are. So I think it is, and even most aging researchers, I think really good ones will say, we want to try and get people to live to be 110, 120, 130. There are a few people who think we live to be 200 or 300, and look at turtles, or look at large whales. Some mammals can live for a long time, so it's not impossible. I just think it's impossible with just subtle variations. I think we have to really restructure our genetic code if we really want to live to be 250 years old. And so I think, which I just don't know if we know enough yet to do that well. I think maybe someday we will, but we're still discovering genes to this day that are in the human genome. The first human genome was really just completed really this past year, to the end, telomeres to telomeres, all the parts of it, which are hard to map, some areas of them. So I think, I think we'll get there eventually, but there's still a lot of fundamental knowledge that we're, I think, just collecting today to enable those questions to be asked, I'd say.
So are you telling me that all these supplements I'm taking, they're not gonna
I think that, well, it's just about expectations. I think, do you think they'll make you live 50 years longer? Probably not. Will they make you live your health span be longer? Hopefully, as lifespan, probably a little bit. I recognize the irony because I have a longevity company called Longevity that we just sold last year. So I'm in the business. I'm just among the more. I'm optimistic about almost everything in science except for how far we can push human longevity. In the absence of large-scale genetic changes. I think you can tweak it, nudge it a little bit, 5, 10 years, maybe 20. But I think, some people who are taking supplements think they're going to live to be 150, which I think is insane, because there's never a human being that's ever lived past 126 is the record. And that was that was decades ago. And that was, that's including a lot of people who've been living in the past 10, 20 years who are taking supplements and variations of drugs for 30 or 40 years. So I think it's a hard problem, so it's a little bit harder than people think it will be. But I applaud everyone who's trying things, because we don't know a lot. So we need lots of people trying a wide range of supplements, modifications. The simplest things are still the best, though. Moving around a lot. The human body was built to move. So exercise, eating well, it's and having good communities. These blue zones are pretty simple changes.
Yeah, definitely. And personally, I'm not necessarily concerned about living a long time. It's more about being really like healthy and youthful, and having all your cognition on all that stuff.
I've lost most of my cognition, so I wish I could get it back. It's too late for me. It's all gone. So at this point, I feel
like. But you seriously feel the difference?
No, I feel I know I feel about the same, I guess. I think I have more wrinkles and more gray hair, I feel like, but I feel like I'm about the same as I was from age 17 until today. But at some point it's going to start to decline, I think.
Yeah. So we haven't solved that one yet. So do you think that we live in a simulation by any chance?
I do not. I think it's a classic philosophical question that, of course, there's many ways where the simulation could be so good that we wouldn't even know it. And the many movies have looked at this question, like The Matrix. But I don't think so. And even if we did, I don't know if it was such a good simulation that we wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Then it may not matter anyway. So if it's that good, it'd be indistinguishable. The only difference is actually one of the really great movies that looked at this question was Inception. You've probably seen that movie by Christopher Nolan. And there was a really, I think, pivotal scene in that movie where they had one serum that let people that were effectively 1 hour was the equivalent of like 1 week when they were under the formula and sleeping basically, but they were able to arguably live more by the fact they were under this serum, and the time was accelerated while they were dreaming, and to them the dream world was more real than the real world. And one of the quotes in the movie said, "Well, who are we to question them if they want to basically live longer effectively because they get more time per hour spent in consciousness? They get a day for every hour or sometimes longer. Who are we to judge them, or who are we to critique them? The idea that simulation is the better option was kind of the implication." But I push back on that because you have to think about long-term sustainability. Like think about like living on this planet for more than several billion years is not possible because the sun will actually engulf the planet. So I think on some level you can't just say let's go live in the simulation because it's better because you get more time, because the structure, the facets that support the ability to live in the simulation still depend on a tangible physical world. And then if that gets eaten by the sun, then no one's living at all, right? So you, at some level, you have to be grounded into what is the substrate that enables any kind of simulation. But if you do, then you could have people that live in pods or live in dream worlds, and have weeks of a vacation in one day or something like that. So I'm not against that. I think if anything, it's efficient. It's good. If you say I took a 4-week vacation in one day and you come back all relaxed, that sounds great. Why
Yeah.
not? So we might get to that state someday.
Yeah, no, I would love that. I think ideally, if it was in a way that you could switch back and forth so
Yeah.
that you had like a lot of time for certain things. I interviewed Donald Hoffman last week. You know him?
Yeah, by
Yeah.
name.
Yeah, yeah. So he's written the Case Against Reality. So basically, he is pretty convinced that we are living in a simulation, in a simulation. Um, I think the more I think about it, the more I feel like we probably are. And because especially when I look at the metaverse, well, like what we are building, and the fact that we are building AI, with which is like if AI becomes conscious, if we are able to, create AI that is conscious, what's to say that we are not the result of someone else's, simulation? And what Donald Hoffman was saying was that he says that on a I hope I'm not butchering his quote, but essentially this was my understanding that on a fundamental level, the universe is right, like a group of conscious agents that are giving rise to these experiences. And he was like, essentially, if we create AI that is conscious, it's not that we are creating AI that is giving rise to a new emergent consciousness. It's more that we are creating a new entity that is a new portal for the consciousness that's already there. So that we are a portal to the underlying consciousness, and then if a silicon-based life becomes conscious, then that's just another portal. And if and he's like very very elegant in the way that he explains it, with mathematics. And he's going to send me his new paper that they're working on, and he was just so excited about it. And I kind of like, inclined to buy into that. I think that's potentially a very interesting idea. And the reason why I'm interested in it is because if it is true, then maybe we could bend reality without having to physically do it.
Yeah.
Like
I'm definitely matter agnostic towards cognition. Even in my book, I have a section about that. What if AI starts out and becomes more benevolent than we are, and maybe is a better steward of life or complexity in the universe? I would be open to that. In fact, even explicitly say so that this is if we design AI correctly, it may be our the better angels of our nature and be better than we are potentially if you do a good programming job. So it could be silicon based or other matter that's creating consciousness, and whatever it might be, and whatever organism it is, or whether a machine. They all are potential allies. They could be enemies too. A lot of people are worried about AI as an enemy. I am less worried about that because I've actually programmed algorithms and machine learning tools, and I think the biggest threat to that, I think, is not the self-awareness of the system, but is more the programmer who designed it and how you design it. I think humans often are the biggest risk to ourselves more than the things that we make, because it could be implemented wrong or programmed incorrectly, I think, is the bigger risk. So I think native intelligence by itself is not necessarily going to decide to do genocide, even though I think we look at our own history and have seen genocide and have seen horrors, and the worry is that we hold up a mirror of cognition and are anxious that that might occur again in the future. But there's no guarantee that it will. There are also extraordinary feats of collaboration and coordination between cultures and nations. So I think I think it can go both ways, but I think people just looking at the negative side of AI are missing half the picture. And so I think whether we're in a simulation or not, or where it might be, I think you have to be open to cognition coming from any object, any entity, definitely.
Very interesting. So when I think of, the metaverse that there are so many different companies now that are trying to build different variations of the metaverse. And I can see AI living, alongside us, living and working alongside us in the metaverse to a point that it could potentially be completely unrecognizable, that you wouldn't know whether you're speaking to a human or a bot. Right now, in the Web3 space, have you ever been on Discord?
No, but
Yes, so a lot of the Web3 communities right now, a lot of them are on Discord. Do you own or have you ever do you have NFTs? Do you have like a crypto wallet? That
yeah,
type.
I've crypto wallet. I've made some NFTs. One we did with Seed Labs, which was by the world's most famous artist, and it was actually made out of fecal microbiome transplant material. So we made an NFT for there and raised some funds for some research. So
That's
yeah,
so interesting.
done a bit of those. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that. Actually, I really want to encourage more people from science and other areas of, of science, art, philosophy, other areas that are not necessarily financially, they're not known for the financial side of things, to come into this space, because right now this whole Web3 NFT tokenization space is so financially driven, and basically everybody is just thinking about minting an NFT and then selling it for more, and it's just become a really almost like, I would say, unsustainable, and
Yes.
like it's creating a very unpleasant culture. But I see, if we get to a point that really scientists start using these technologies, the technology of NFTs is really interesting and very helpful. Right now, I'm building a platform which is basically like a Web3 version of LinkedIn, with like for professional networking and education, learning, and and we really want to bring in more scientists, more people from various backgrounds into this space. People in technology who want to use this technology as a way to raise funds, for research, and for things that may be much easier to get public funding for, or government funding for, but is like areas of real interest. Like, for example, this whole thing about longevity research. You could come in and issue NFTs, and then the people who become part of that community, they can follow your research. They maybe some of them will be able to or would like to volunteer to kind of participate in clinical trials and things like that. So I see a real possibility for using this technology to kind of like go away from this speculation culture that has been developed, and actually put it to good use. So would love to know, how you think people like us developing these new kind of platforms and technologies can help scientists open up new possibilities for exploration.
Well, lots of ways. The really good question to think. The scientists often make Git repositories or code bases for hosting data or methods, but and you have it be on a website where you can query it, you can download it, but there haven't been as much really great platforms for sharing or decentralization of some of the data yet for science. But there's a really sharp need for it, because the data silos problem is a big problem in science and medicine, where people have their own data sets, and it's either hard to share the data, or it is essentially impossible just because of limitations for clinical data sets. So you have to have agreements between universities and companies, and there is it's very slow and laborious just to be able to share data between entities and scientists. Though there are some groups that have tried to build platforms around this, like Synapse is one. Sage Bio Networks built a platform for data sharing. So there are examples of people who've tried to create these systems where it makes it easier for people just to share methods, tools, data, and it's getting better, I think, a little bit. But I think there's a lot that scientists could benefit from newer platforms, or even build out stronger ones. And so I think any way you can make it easier for people to share data, methods, tools, they generally, I would be happy to. They're often pretty busy though, and sometimes there's a lot of complexity to them, like a protocol that involves moving cells and treating them in a certain way with a very specific instrument. Is sometimes hard to describe, but there's often even new journals, like one's called like Jove, the Journal of Visual Experiments, which is just, it's video based. So you actually watch someone perform a protocol in a laboratory to learn the protocol. So, one good thing about newer platforms is you can have not just a paper describing something, but get videos, get content, get, engagement with the scientists and the protocols, for example, which is good.
So that is more like using the blockchain technology for data management, which is super interesting. I'm thinking also from the viewpoint of having a deeper connection between scientists, and the general public, in a way that people can really connect with what you're doing. Right now, obviously, a lot of people discover you from, say, like I have, through podcasts and this type of content. But I think there is let's say, for example, if there was like a community of 10,000, 20,000 people who are deeply interested in what you're doing, and they're willing to buy NFTs, to be part of a community where they can have access to you. Maybe once a week you will do a Q&A, or you kind of like upload, latest updates of whatever it is that you're working on. This could be really interesting. And it would be a new way of creating community. So one of the things that we're kind of like exploring with the platform we're building is to go away from this idea of having like big following, like looking on, yeah, exactly, like going away from that, and instead creating an environment where people can have deeper connections with those people that they want to follow or support, and that you pick a number of communities or people that you can handle, that you can follow what they're doing, and you can also support them financially by buying their tokens. And those tokens, because they're non-fungible, that then whenever somebody is no longer wanting to follow that, they can just simply sell it on the secondary market, and somebody else will buy it, and then they come into the space. So I would really love to see more scientists kind of look into this model, because right now it's really not being used to its fullest potential. And do you think that scientists like yourself, do you think that you would be interested in something like that, or would you be like, no, I just want to focus on my work and like not really connect with people?
I mean, there's always a need for more funding for research, where most scientists and clinical researchers are writing grants, usually every week, sometimes every day. It's to the National Institutes of Health, to the National Science Foundation, to philanthropy, to industry collaborators. Experiments and staff and lab resources are expensive, and you have to fund the research. So it is a part of the job is to raise funding for research, and clinical trials can be millions of dollars for one drug, or specific cell culture experiments or new instruments can be $500,000 for just one instrument, sometimes more. So it is expensive, and so raising funds is always a priority. And like I said, we've done some NFT fundraising once but it's more for charity. But the charity was to do research, and so I think this is an untapped resource that would, the people, you just have to make it easy for them, because if you ask people to say, can you summarize this for an NFT fundraising campaign, most scientists or doctors or clinicians would say, I don't know what to do. I can send you some figures or some pictures from my lab, but they would probably need a little bit of help to get it onto a platform. But they're certainly would be open to it. And like I said, I've done a little bit of this, and it was it was a good experience, because it was not too much work and also a bit of fun. So it was basically with a fecal microbiome transplant. It was the most famous artist. I don't know if you've heard of him. It was we did it work with it was to fund gut brain research, and so it was a fun grant to look at microbes that are disrupted in autism, and got some money to actually basically raise funds for the research. So it was I think seeing more of that would be great to have happen.
So that's super interesting, because I think as we're building this platform, I'm thinking about like creating an arm of it that is specifically for this type of thing, and helping bring more scientists and researchers into the Web3 space. So this is really good to know that there is potentially interest in that. I got a question around education. With this, this new space, when I look at the speed with which Web3 is developing, I can see that the official kind of educational institutions are going to be left behind, because they are just not evolving fast enough to be able to teach these things. Like if you wanted to learn about blockchain right now, there's no point in doing a university degree in it. You need to learn it on the job, because it's moving so fast that by the time you are accepted, to do something, it's moving so fast. So what are your thoughts on formal education, and how do you see it, changing in the next 5 to 10 years?
I've actually been involved in a couple other universities that are free and public. One is called World Quant University, which is for people that want to get quantitative trading experience and training and education, but for free. So I think we'll see a lot more. And MIT and Caltech and Cornell, I put all of my lecture materials are all online for free. A lot of my videos are online. So more and more faculty and professors are putting the material online for free, anyone to use, to download, to basically learn from and deploy the technologies, the latest methods. So that's a good thing in general for humanity, for people to be able to learn. But the challenge is people still want accreditation. They want some proof, if you will, that you have some kind of rigorous training. And some of the online courses do this. But I think we'll see less, I think overall less need for a degree. And people, Elon Musk, who got into grad school but didn't go to grad school, and but people have dropped out of college and then become billionaires. So we know it's possible to not finish school and become a billionaire and become successful or invent an amazing technology. But it's unlikely, I guess. So I think people who say, I'm to hell with school, I'm just going to drop out and become a billionaire, you might succeed, but the odds are that you probably will not. And so if you want to kind of place your bets of what's more likely, it still has a lot of value, and not just in the education, right? So when you go anywhere for 4 years or 5 years to one institution and you meet people and you learn from people and you build a community, the community also has value. So I think what people forget about education is it's not just the classes and the homework, it's the people in the institution and the lifelong friends that you'll make that become, Supreme Court justice or become the CEO of a large corporation that then you can call 20 years later and say, oh, we had class together. How are you? I've got an idea. Let's chat. And so I think The sad part of just having everything online is I think people it's abstracted, and so they have less of a tangible connection. I fear now. Not necessarily. Sometimes you can have a closer connection with someone online than in person. So it's not necessarily always more intimate in person, but it is so far usually that way. And so I think things like Web 3.0 or like more engagement with people online is good, but I want to see ways to improve that, not just for education, but for all parts of life. And so I think it's less needed today than it ever has been, accreditation or a degree, but it's still useful and helpful. And I think, at the end of the day, having a lot of experience and showing sort of what your history of work that you've done or papers or projects, if you're an artist, what's the art that you've done, right? So being able to point to what have I done, and a lot of it you can put online of these are my milestones, things I've completed, work I've done, and people will respect that a lot.
Yeah, and actually, right now in the Web3 community, there's a real culture of anonymity or pseudonymity because, I think it started kind of with Satoshi Nakamoto, with Bitcoin. So a lot of people are pseudonymous, and they are also using avatars of, different NFTs that they have. So it's very hard to know who you're talking to.
Right.
And some people, their names is like just a number or some kind of random letters that like X2Y something, like so like there's this issue of I don't know if it's an issue, but there's definitely a new culture of anonymity, which is kind of makes it hard, which is making it harder to make deep connections. And I don't know how things like accreditation could work in that space.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, I mean, what you could is accredit the avatar, but then how do you know it's you when you go to meet someone? So I think that does raise an interesting challenge: is who actually got the credit, who has done this project. And some things like anonymous, like some of the hacking groups, are anonymous on purpose because they have a political goal or they try to disrupt governments, and that's why they need to be. But for most people, you want some provenance, some tracking of who did that and who learned that, and who it was. So yeah, at some point, people will have to come out of the shadows and declare who they are. I think there's no way around that. Which I think invariably that's a good thing. I think in an ideal world, you would be able to say, no matter where you are or what you're doing, that you would want anyone to be able to see what it is. The simple concept is, what if you could be proud of everything that you're doing, everywhere you're doing it? And if you're not proud of it, then why would you do it? It's kind of the simple question. Then you just shouldn't do it. It's kind of a simple morality thought experiment, right? So the anonymity. I mean, that's easy for me to say in this country where I am in the current profession, right? But a lot of times it's for people that are persecuted, that are under duress or under even under repressive governments, right? So I have the liberty and the ability to dream of this from a very plush position. But I think the function of anonymity has a lot of power, especially in places where there's active persecution or of religious minorities or other minorities or just anyone who disagrees with the government. So places like that, we need to support them, and because it's the only way they'll survive.
Yeah. Although most of the people that I see are anonymous, pseudonymous in the Web3 space right now, they're often people who are living in free countries, and I'm not sure, it could be that because of tax reasons, or, it could be that they are, yeah, could be like lots of other reasons. But we are at in the very early days of this new movement, and this might be a good way of bringing our conversation towards the end as well. So we're very early days of this new movement that we call Web3. Even the term Web3 kind of started circling around in the last less than a year, becoming a bit more popular. So new culture is being developed here, and this new culture is going to have implications for how we do science, how technology develops. So as a scientist, I would love to see you and other colleagues of that you have to actually to keep an eye on this new movement, both from the viewpoint of how it could potentially help you propagate and continue your work and get your message to new audiences, and raise investment, raise funds, etc. And both also in terms of how it could be damaging possibly in some ways, like how it could impact you in a negative way. I don't know all the answers. I'm just like, it's very early days and I'm like really just exploring it. So just having these conversations with scientists like yourself, just bringing it to your attention, and hopefully, over the next 6 months to a year, kind of engaging and seeing what you're doing, and like looking at how we could potentially bring you more into this space. But human culture is changing, and it's changing fast and in really strange ways, new ways, kind of like the early days of social media. Think of like how the impact of Facebook, how Facebook really changed our culture. This is what's happening now with tokenization.
Yeah, I think the idea of decentralization and using some of the blockchain technologies. Some of the pros could be the decentralization, but that also could be at the same point the challenge is that it becomes less. It could become less reliable. It might be more traceable, but it might be less reliable in certain circumstances. It may end up costing more emission, like in terms of the actual compute cost. It can scale and become actually very expensive just on the amount of just compute and energy it's taking to process and mine the chains. Which itself is, you could think about the ethics of that. Like, is it actually ethical to build a system that is more energy hungry? Like, is there ways we can build the system to be more efficient? There probably are ways, but I think from the default, it's not. And so, I think it's the other thing we have to consider is, what is it a solution in search of a problem, or is it something? Because the problem today is the concern of sort of big tech or people being in charge of what's who has your information, how it's moving. But there's a reason that Facebook is free, right? The quid pro quo is that you get that service for free, and that you're giving away a lot of your data, which people sign when they do the end user agreement. But it's still, you can post a lot of information online. You could always write your own domain and have your own website and build your own network. There's nothing stopping anyone from doing that. It's just harder, right? So I think it is the concerns of big tech are more about privacy and what they do with that data, and less about the fact that no one else can do it. I mean, if you just make you can do your own HTML coding and make your own website and go back to different message boards and share data, share samples. So I really want to make sure that we're building a solution that actually solves a problem, not just building a solution because it'd be cool to have it be built on blockchain technology. Just it is happening even in genomics. There's companies that are saying we're going to build a whole genome sequencing for your clinical data and then have it be secure through blockchain. But you don't need the blockchain to secure it, right? So it's an additional feature that's not needed. It's certainly not in medical systems, right? So at a hospital, has already in place systems that keep it secure and hold your data, and most of it's through controlling access. But so I think it's but it's very early days, as you were just saying, how these play out and what becomes the most useful for different applications. We're still learning, and I think we'll have to wait and see what's most useful for scientists, for medical staff, for researchers. We'll find out, I think, over the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, definitely. I think you nailed it there, about the solution in search of a problem. A lot of chains do feel like that
Yeah.
they are a solution in search of a problem. A lot of them, they are basically basically taking any concept and then saying, now we are doing that on the blockchain, right? Like,
Right.
yes. So it definitely, there is a bit of that in there. but again, like you said, yeah, it's very early days. So this has been super interesting. I would love to stay in touch and see how things are developing over time, and like look at maybe potentially how we could use this technology to support the work that you're doing.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah, well, a pleasure to have me on the show. Thanks so much,
Thank you.
and look forward to staying in touch.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Professor Chris Mason. Be sure to follow his excellent work. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it on Apple, Spotify, or any other one of your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to give it a 5-star rating and write a review. The full interviews are also available on my YouTube channel, The Somi Arian Show.